Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
You've devoted so many years of your life to service in the military. It came up today, the military did, and I want to read you the context. President Trump, who repeatedly insisted during the campaign that Mexico would pay for a wall along the southern border, is privately pushing the U.S. military to fund construction of his signature project. Trump has told advisors that he was spurned in a large spending bill last week when lawmakers appropriated only $1.6 billion for the border wall. He has suggested to Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and congressional leaders that the Pentagon could fund the sprawling project, citing a national security risk. Malcolm, that would indicate that people coming across this porous border are somehow combatants or potential combatants, would it not? And do you have any problem with this?
Well, certainly, I have a problem with it, and everyone who is associated with the defense arena is going to have a problem with this. First off, someone really needs to sit him down with a copy of Schoolhouse Rock and show him precisely how the government works. Funding and government funding is the mandate of the Congress. It cannot just come out of the Defense Department. This is not a favor that General Mattis can do for the president, which is dip in there and take out $25 billion of allocated funds, which goes to war fighting, which goes to combat preparedness, which goes to building new ships and systems and making sure that they come online over time, or goes to the military families and health care. Why he would think that he could just go and order the Defense Department and do that is just indicative of the way he thinks about the world. That, you know, that CEO attitude, if I point to you, you can do it. This is never going to happen. And I just think it shows a level of desperation on the president's part that he thought he could get away with even asking the question.
It is Thursday, the 29th of March of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Mighty fine. Yeah, a little bit of spice in your life. Okay. So, maybe Trump isn't even at the level of Schoolhouse Rock. Run, Dick, run. Run, Jane, run. Maybe that's the level of intellectual inquiry that he is capable of. Yep, doesn't know how government works and doesn't care. And now this morning he's going after Amazon because Amazon pays the U.S. Postal Service to deliver packages. The guy thinks Amazon's getting the Postal Service to deliver their packages for free. What, you know, this guy's such an idiot. But like my Trump bro says, he's the right president for the right time. And if my Trump bro is right, we all better start learning Cyrillic really quick. Word is coming out that it looks like Trump's might have already pushed John Kelly aside as chief of staff and is running it himself, and I guess it shows. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, Malala has returned home for the first time since the Taliban shot her. And I don't mean to be flippant, but I would hope she has some sort of security detail. Sure hope so. This is a story that I considered diving into, but maybe we might do this tomorrow. But the only black field agent in Minnesota was just arrested yesterday for leaking, apparently what the FBI says, national security information to The Intercept. There was an article The Intercept wrote that detailed the secret ways in which the FBI has been going about their business since 9/11. And I guess I was going to say, I guess that we're not really supposed to know how our government works anymore. And if we have a president who doesn't even care, we're going to get into deep doo-doo. And so he's being tried under the Espionage Act. You know, it's really rich that Jeff Sessions wants to try the only people under the Espionage Act who essentially exposed Russian collusion with this campaign to take over America. Interesting, isn't it? All right. Well, of course, the got a new VA director, Trump's personal doctor. No, not that one. The one at the White House, who actually served for I think at least 3 presidents. I think this is his 3rd president. So G.W. Bush, Obama, and now Trump, which is interesting because it doesn't matter. You know, there are people in government who have worked since Reagan until now, and Trump considers them to be Obama holdovers. So I guess he liked the way this doctor, Sonny Jackson, is that his name? I guess he liked how he looked on TV and presented himself, because that's all that matters. And speaking of TV, Trump loves his Roseanne. And why wouldn't he? Okay, well, what's on the menu today? All sorts of news, of course, because it's just coming down. We've curated some news for you, and now, just before I started to do all of this, I thought, do I have to throw everything up in the air and quickly write new copy? Well, I ran out of time. I'm just going to have to go with what I got. And what do we have to attend to today? Well, in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, we're going to talk about Tea Party ex-congressman Steve Stockman of Texas, busted for recruiting Egyptian officials to help him secure a $30 million payout. Grifters gotta grift. A Massachusetts judge rules civil disobedience is a necessity to prevent climate change. And hackers disrupt Baltimore's emergency call system, while Atlanta is still affected by a ransomware cyber extortion attack. And that payday is coming due. After the break, we'll move to the chef's table, where all 22 women of the Senate are mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. And the Senate staffer behind the GOP's attack on Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation is exposed. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. you go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice on the rightish of the page there is the chat room link, and our roaring girl, Kelly Lincoln, monitors that for, well, if you have any questions, requests, concerns, you can contact us there. And follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio. We are on Facebook as Netroots Radio. And you could follow me on Twitter and I'm at Justice Putnam. And also the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's. I'm there as Justice Putnam. Now, to the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage are the Contribute Donate buttons. And thank you for your generosity. That is indeed how we pay our bills. And we're unable to do this without you. Podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be had by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so, I wanted to get into the Michael Bennett story, but I have put that into, pocket, and we'll dive into that. That's very, let's just say that story really pisses me off. And we'll talk about it tomorrow. I promise. Okay, now Steve Stockman, the whole Tea Party movement was not grassroots. We all know that. It was AstroTurf. It was a grifting operation on one level. The billionaires who were behind it had a different idea about what they were doing with the money. But a person like Steve Stockman, who probably holds some of the sentiments, but knows how to make a buck. and I always love how they call us the morally bankrupt ones. Okay. That's how it goes. Well, Noor Al-Sabai at a Raw Story penned this piece. In the ongoing fraud saga surrounding former Representative Steve Stockman, Repug of Texas. Just anybody new to the show? There's a lot of in this reporter's opinion interspersed throughout. So don't blame Noor Al-Sabai for my embellishment. And Noor, I hope you don't find that I'm being disrespectful. But this is how we used to do it in the Cascades when we had no type of entertainment. No TV. Radio worked, but we used to entertain ourselves sort of like this. Well, that repug from Texas, Steve Stockman, prosecutors have introduced charges claiming the Texas Republicans solicited Egyptian military officials to help him secure a $30 million donation from a failing cement company. What? You're going to use Egyptian military officials as your muscle to get, you give us some protection money and we'll take care of you. Well, the Houston Chronicle reported that Stockman, who was facing 28 counts ranging from filing a false tax return to improper use of campaign funds in his federal corruption trial, never got the donation from Mexico-based company Cemex during a trip to the North African country. However, he did allegedly pay an aide who arranged the visit from accounts meant for another charitable cause. And I know a lot of Trump people right now. Trump, my own Trump bro will argue, well, what was wrong with what he was doing? And I will say that is indicative of how morally corrupt we've, become. During testimony on Tuesday, a witness said the former congressman claimed the funds would go toward educating Americans about the historic importance of Egypt and the Middle East, or perhaps toward shipping medical supplies to Egypt and Africa. Could be either teaching people about how great Egypt was, and could be, or shipping medical supplies. I don't know, one of the two. I can't remember. Stockman was indicted last May after investigators found evidence of what government lawyers called a white-collar crime spree. You'll notice that they didn't chase him into his own backyard and shoot him dead with 20 shots while he's laying down on the ground, face down. That's called entitlement. Well, that crime spree included accusations that he and a former aide stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from charities, some of which they used to finance his campaigns and pay for personal expenses. Though the Chronicle did not mention the date of the trip, Stockman did admit in January of 2014 that he had been in Egypt and, wait for it, Russia. After his absence from campaign and congressional events in Texas and Washington raised suspicions that he was missing. Next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, is by Natasha Geeling out of Think Progress. For almost a year, hundreds of protesters in Massachusetts took action to stop construction of a high-pressure fracked gas pipeline, which would have run for 5 miles through the Boston neighborhood of West Roxbury. The demonstrations, which featured protesters sitting in holes dug for the pipeline, led to the arrests of nearly 200 people, many of whom faced criminal charges for trespassing and disturbing the peace. On Tuesday, the final 13 protesters facing charges over the demonstrations were found not responsible by a Massachusetts judge, who ruled that the potential environmental and public health impacts of the pipeline, including the risk of climate change, had made civil disobedience legally necessary. According to the Climate Disobedience Center, which supported the protesters in their demonstration, this is the first example of a judge finding defendants not responsible on the basis of a necessity defense, something that has been used by the climate movement increasingly in recent years as a basis for direct action against fossil fuel infrastructure. Wow. You got to know, this is, on a very thin line here, because property, the protection of property is much more important than really our lives. And everybody knows that. Okay, it's a rare piece of good news for the climate movement, which has seen an increase in the criminalization on environmental protest in recent years. Well, yeah, environmental protesters are considered to be terrorists now. Enemies of the state. You want clean water? You're going to have to go to jail. You commie. And it's good news for the Roxbury protesters, because while they didn't stop the pipeline from eventually becoming operational, they did force the pipeline company, Spectra Energy, to admit on the record that it didn't have a safety plan in place in the event of a catastrophic failure. Well, we got that. In this moment of 2018, when we get a lot of bad news every day, I think good news in the movement is something that the movement always needs. One of the protesters said, "This isn't an unbridled victory, but it's good news, and it's evidence that when we can bring the full range of evidence that actually should be considered in our cases before court, we may find someone who is prepared to hear that evidence and make a ruling based on all of the relevant evidence." According to Alice Cherry, co-founder and staff attorney for the Climate Defense Project, which was part of the legal team for the West Roxbury protesters, the necessity defense is an old legal doctrine that allows people to argue that a crime was justified in order to prevent greater harm, like a ship captain dumping cargo in order to prevent a ship from sinking. Well, I don't know. In Vietnam, we had to destroy the village to save it, didn't we? To mount a successful necessity defense, defendants need to prove that there is an imminent threat, and that the threat could not be avoided through legal means. In the case of the West Roxbury protesters, this meant showing that the pipeline would contribute both to climate change and local environmental risks, and that local elected officials had been unsuccessful in attempts to see the pipeline rerouted or blocked. Well, the West Roxbury protesters never got a chance to mount a full necessity defense, however, because prosecutors eventually chose to downgrade the charges from criminal to civil. Still, the judge allowed each defendant 2 minutes to explain their reasoning for taking direct action against the pipeline. At the conclusion of the testimony, the judge decided to find the defendants not responsible, the civil equivalent of not guilty, on the basis of necessity. Well, I would think that part of this decision might be that the pipeline wasn't really stopped. And the company, I presume, wanted to bring civil charges to make a point. But I think the point's been made on all sides. I don't want to diminish this because I could see this as good news, but I think of what they did, on an Indian reservation, for instance, and they brought in the military and, that Standing Rock. And people of color, they get environmental depredations thrust upon them without a thought. Oh, a refinery, we'll just put it right here. But there's people living here. They'll get used to it. Or as many of the people I worked with in the oil industry, when we would complain about the smells, they'd say, "Oh man, that smells like money." Yeah, well, if that's what money smells like, maybe we ought to be handling a lot less of it, huh? Well, known as the valve turners, activists who all face criminal charges ranging from misdemeanor trespass to felony criminal mischief have all tried to argue that they should be allowed to present a necessity defense in court. And in all but a Minnesota case, the pleas have been ignored. And now a Massachusetts judge has said a necessity defense when it comes to environmental concerns can be a legal justification. In 2018, 8 states have already considered bills that would create new penalties for protests that disrupts critical infrastructure, like pipelines. And last year, 84 members of Congress sent a letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions asking if the Department of Justice had the power to treat the willful disruption of pipelines as a terrorist threat. Because we're not talking about national security here. We're talking about something much more important, and that's the smell of money. As protesters face increasingly severe legal consequences for civil disobedience, the climate movement will likely lean more heavily on the necessity defense as a legal tactic, and courts will have to grapple with whether action to avoid the climate crisis counts as justification for illegal actions. Well, I think, and I once again hate to be a cynic, but I believe this case will prove to be an anomaly, and there will be other judges, and they'll be the majority, and they'll find nothing wrong with maybe renditioning a few of these environmental protesters to a black site, maybe in Poland, where they can be taught a lesson or two. know why this is not a larger story and why more people aren't concerned, because we've been warned that infrastructure and various levels will be attacked. I don't mean by environmentalists who are considered to be terrorists in our country, because when outside foreign powers attack our systems, apparently in this administration, that's just A-OK. Go after Amazon for paying the U.S. Postal Service to deliver packages, but do little for the actual attacks that are taking place on our soil. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? This article is by Dustin Volz and David Beasley out of Reuters. Hackers disrupted service over the weekend of a Baltimore computer network that supports emergency calls, forcing the city to resort to manual operations to handle calls, the city's mayor office said. A limited breach affecting Baltimore's computer-assisted dispatch system, which is used to support and direct 911 and other emergency calls, was identified Sunday morning, according to Frank Johnson, Baltimore's chief information officer. The disruption was the second cyber attack on a major U.S. city within the past week, coming days after Atlanta was struck by a widespread ransomware cyber extortion attack that interrupted bill collection services, downed the airport's wireless internet, and impeded other city services. Some Atlanta city services remained offline for a seventh day following last Thursday's ransomware attack. Atlanta police said that some parts of the department's operations remained impacted by the attack, though its ability to respond to emergencies has not been affected, so they say. As teams diligently work to restore our network, it would not be prudent right now to go into specifics about police operations, a spokeswoman told Reuters. We have begun to do some tasks manually and continue to look for other workarounds so that we can continue to serve the public with the same level of service that they have come to expect. City workers turned away residents trying to pay their water bills and attend scheduled traffic court hearings, saying the cyber attack had halted work at those departments. Before I go on, let me interject. There is a political ideology right now at play, run out of the Oval Office of the White House, to deconstruct the administrative state. And these parties have joined forces with a foreign hostile power to do that. Now, this might just be a 400-pound guy in a basement in New Jersey. Or it could be the same crew in Macedonia and elsewhere working for you-know-who. A senior U.S. cybersecurity official told Reuters there were no indications the Atlanta attack was related to the one in Baltimore. Sure. During the Baltimore outage, details of incoming callers seeking emergency support could not electronically be relayed to dispatchers, forcing call center staff to do so manually. The impacted computer was isolated and taken offline, and the computer-assisted dispatch system was fully restored by early Monday morning. These critical services were not impacted nor disrupted at any time, the spokesperson said. The mayor's office declined to say if the city had identified any suspects behind the breach, if any data was stolen, or if other city services had been recently targeted in cyber attacks. An FBI spokesman told the Baltimore Sun that the Bureau was providing technical assistance. The regional FBI office in Baltimore could not immediately be reached for comment. It's a counter-espionage investigation, folks. That's what's been going on. Okay, let's go to our break, and we'll come back and meet up at the chef's table, go through the weather, and the rest of the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Workplace exploitation is at least as old as the Industrial Revolution. But rather than using whips to make the assembly lines move ever faster, today's corporate exploiters use technology, devious work schedules, and lobbyists to extract more work from employees for less pay. Walmart, for example, wants to provide next-day delivery for online customers by having its low-wage workforce use their own time and vehicles to drop off packages as they go home after work. Economists have a technical term for these corporate ploys: stealing. One entire group being victimized by corporate thieves are the 4.3 million Americans who make up our tipped workforce, mostly employed as waitstaff in restaurants, from big chains like IHOP to the most exclusive dining establishments. These workers fall under a grossly unjust category of labor law that allows their employers to pay a miserly minimum wage as low as $2.13 an hour. The rationale is that customers will subsidize this sub-poverty pay by leaving generous tips, a convenient corporate lie refuted by the fact that the income of tipped workers is a third less than non-tipped, and they are nearly twice as likely to live in poverty. Luckily, Trump has intervened to help. Lucky for restaurant owners, that is. Bowing to demands by restaurant industry lobbyists, Trump's Labor Department has proposed a new rule allowing employers to seize workers' tips and use them for any purpose, including fattening their own profits. Paying $2.13 an hour already amounts to a massive wage theft, but this elevates it to legalized highway robbery. This is Jim Hightower saying, even the most notorious robbers in history would be too ashamed to pull a job this wicked, but today's corporate greed and Trump's ethical bankruptcy is turning wickedness into business as usual.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You are listening to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. James Madison was a strong advocate for religious freedom and opposed the establishment of the Anglican Church as a state-supported religion in Virginia. He helped persuade George Mason to endorse the liberty of conscience for all in the Virginia Declaration of Rights of 1776, but he was not able to separate church and government in Virginia's new constitution. Madison, however, did not give up. 10 years later, in the Virginia legislature, he led the effort to adopt the Statute for Religious Freedom drafted by Thomas Jefferson. The law provided the basis for ending a state church in Virginia and granting equal freedom to all faiths. In Madison's words, it extinguished forever the ambitious hope of making laws for the human mind. That's all for today's podcast. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Is labor history in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day the United States Supreme Court upheld the Adamson Act. The act had initially been passed and signed into law the previous September to avoid a nationwide railway strike. It established the 8-hour workday and overtime pay for interstate railroad workers. The 4 railroad brotherhoods, the engineers, firemen, brakemen, and conductors, had been pushing for these terms since at least 1915. When the railroads refused to budge, the unions prepared to strike. It was the first federal law that sought to determine minimum wages and maximum hours for private industry. The railroads were furious with President Woodrow Wilson for demanding quick passage of the law. They filed the case Wilson versus New, which challenged the constitutionality of the act. The railroads refused to abide by the new law while they waited for their case to be heard, ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 4 railroad brotherhoods grew tired of waiting and organized for another strike. The court rejected the railroads' claim and upheld the act. President Wilson had hoped to ensure labor peace as the United States was on the cusp of entering World War I. Seen as a powerful victory for the unions, the railway employees pressed for similar demands. When the industry looked as though it was headed for yet another strike, President Wilson exercised the Army Appropriations Act and issued an executive order at the end of 1917 that placed the railroads under federal control. This nationalized the railroad industry into 3 divisions under the newly established United States Railroad Administration between the years of 1917 and 1920. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labor.
This is a Radio Labor report recorded on Wednesday, March 28th, 2018. I'm Mark Belanger. Trade unions in Africa are campaigning extensively to help reduce what are known as illicit financial flows, or IFFs. This is because more money is flowing out of Africa because of tax evasion and other illicit activities than is going into the continent to help it develop. I talked to Akator Jewel Odiji, the coordinator of human and trade union rights for ITUC Africa. The ITUC is the global body which represents national union centers such as the Ghana Trades Union Congress. I asked Mr. Odiji why labor unions in Africa are working so hard to stop or at least reduce illicit financial flows, IFFs.
The question of reversing or stopping IFF is a workers' issue, it's a trade union issue, it's a community issue. Because like we have seen, IFF has missed opportunity costs for our people, opportunities to grow jobs, opportunity to pay fair wages, opportunity to defend the human rights of our people through effective public service delivery, opportunities to reverse poverty when oftentimes when government is in short need of resources, they quickly think of raising our consumption taxes, which, sales tax, value-added tax, which oftentimes hurts the poor more than the wealthy. It's these missed opportunities where you have a very narrow, seemingly dominant narrow understanding of tax cuts when you are told that when you reduce tax cuts for the rich and wealthy and the big corporations, it's going to create jobs. Neoliberal global discussion, which in itself is not true. And then most importantly, the question of tax is also at the heart of citizens' power, people's power, workers' power. It's an issue of democracy. It speaks to the issue of accountability. It gives citizens the right to ask for government to be responsive, to be accountable to them. And it talks about how corporations that are doing businesses in different communities, in African economies, are also responsible to these communities in ways that can contribute to some sense of redistribution at the current level of wealth share to the poor, where you see working people working so hard, but yet the armies of the working poor is on the increase. And so for us, the idea of getting involved in the question of defeating illicit financial flow is about how do we together increase chances of a more equitable share of global prosperity is why we are involved in this struggle.
You are the lead coordinator of the Stop the Bleeding campaign, working to curb illicit financial flows in Africa. Tell us about the campaign.
First, the campaign is about raising awareness on the part of our members, on the part of workers, on the part of citizens, on the part of the African public, to say, look, the situation is this. Tax is not supposed to be such a complicated issue. But most companies are working with their strength, their political and economic strength, have been able to design a global tax architecture that makes it look so complex, of course, in their own interest. And so the campaign is involved in trying to make citizens understand tax is about how tax works, and by and large increase their awareness and to be able to make it much easier to enforce some sense of power from below. Importantly, also, particularly for Africa, what you find, what you know, at least the mainstream media says that, is that the problem of corruption is largely the problem, public sector corruption. But you see, when we have since found out that, yes, corruption is the issue, but corruption is the smaller picture. The bigger picture is the fact that commercial activities take over 65% of illicit financial flow contribution. 35% of that come from criminal activities like money laundering, human trafficking, sex and trafficking, drugs, and all of that.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Follow us on Twitter @Radio Labor. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is continuing his visit to the U.S. this week, and he's generating headlines in energy markets by announcing his intention to partner with Russia for up to 2 decades to coordinate oil production and help stabilize prices. Saudi Arabia has long been the core member of the OPEC oil cartel, and formalizing some policy overlap with non-OPEC member Russia would be a major deal, at least theoretically.
Signing a deal on paper would not do the job.
Robert McNally is the president of the Rapidan Group and served as President George W. Bush's top energy advisor.
The market will probably quickly test the organization's mettle.
According to McNally, the near and medium-term challenges facing Saudi Arabia and Russia aren't the low prices of recent years, but a possible oil boom caused by several years of underinvestment in production and slower-than-expected shifts to renewable energy and electric vehicles. If that happens, producers could find themselves back in 2008 territory, when oil surged to $148 a barrel with no more oil left to pump.
Most swing producers in history, especially the big ones, all of them, have failed not because they couldn't prevent prices from collapsing by agreeing to cut, but because they couldn't prevent prices from booming. They actually lost control on the upside.
McNally says the Saudis are wise to sync up policy with Russia, but taming oil's boom-bust cycles won't be easy.
They have to go well beyond signing a marriage contract. They have to show that they have the collective will to adjust production up and down, to hold spare production capacity, and to act quickly, proactively, and collectively to stabilize markets, to prevent big inventory swings one way or the other. And that is a lot easier said than done.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays is our daily special. Okay, so let's start off with weather from around the world, and we begin along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the West Coast, where it is currently 39 degrees Fahrenheit. We're expected to be a tad warmer than yesterday. We went to 71 yesterday. We are going to go to 73. Winds currently are negligible, and they will be picking up later in the afternoon to 5 to 10 miles per hour out of the west. Pressure is holding at 30.29 inches. Visibility is 8 miles. Humidity is 90%. Well, humid. Huh. Okay, and it looks like we're going to be in the mid 40s. Oh my, mid to upper 40s. For our lows for the foreseeable future. And we will be in the low 70s. Well, we'll say low to mid 70s, because where I'm at, it might get to 75. And we are expecting showers beginning on Tuesday. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. Ow. Okay, London is 45 with rain. Paris is 53 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 65 and fair. Kiev is 33 and cloudy. Kabul is 62 and clear. Hong Kong, 68 and fair. Tokyo is 64 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 71 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. Starting off here for the first story at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of Share Blue Media by Matthew Chapman. Now, all 22 women senators are mad as hell, and they say inaction is unacceptable. They're making sure the days of sweeping misconduct under the rug is over. Okay, stop doing it, guys. Women in the Senate are tired of inaction on sexual harassment, and now they are calling for action with one voice. A letter to Senate leaders Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, written by Senators Amy Klobuchar, Kristen Gillibrand, and Patty Murray, all just Republicans, demands immediate reform of the laws that allow lawmakers to settle misconduct allegations with little or no consequence. It has been co-signed by every single one of the women in the Senate, 22 in all from both parties. Okay. As the letter notes, the House has already acted. Their bill includes a number of important provisions, such as eliminating waiting periods before a victim can take their case to court, increased transparency for awards and settlements, and a requirement that members of the Senate and House pay for an award or settlement stemming from a case of sexual harassment or discrimination that they personally commit. Additionally, a new resolution provides House staff who are survivors of harassment or discrimination get access to free legal representation. Senate staff who face similar harassment or discrimination must pay personally for legal representation or represent themselves through complicated legal proceedings. Inaction is unacceptable when a survey shows that 4 out of 10 women congressional staffers believe the sexual harassment is a problem on Capitol Hill, and 1 out of 6 women in the same survey responded that they have been the survivors of sexual harassment. The letter concludes that no longer can we allow the perpetrators of these crimes to hide behind a 23-year-old law. Now, it's rare for every woman in the Senate, all 17 Democrats and all 5 Republicans, to unanimously agree on anything. But among women, the drive to eliminate discrimination on Capitol Hill knows no party. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, a Republican of West Virginia, for example, has been prominent in the fight to reform harassment policies in the Senate Rules Committee. Among male lawmakers, however, a partisan divide is visible. And why wouldn't it be? Chuck Schumer agreed with the women senators who pushed for Al Franken to resign following misconduct allegations. By contrast, House Speaker Paul Ryan has not kept retiring Representative Blake Farenthold, Repug of Texas, to hold him to his word about paying back the over $80,000 in taxpayer money to settle a sexual harassment suit. But the women in the Senate are sending a clear message. It is time for Congress to lead by example and take a stand for equal dignity and rights.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Finishing up here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is quite a deep dive by ProPublica, and hopefully we can get through it all, but we won't. But links are, of course, on my Daily Co's diary, so check it out there. Jason Foster, Chief Investigative Counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, fits a classic Washington profile. A powerful, mostly unknown force at the center of some of the most consequential battles on Capitol Hill. For the last year, Foster, empowered by his boss, Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, the committee's chairman, of course, has been the behind-the-scenes architect of an assault on the FBI and most centrally its role in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. With Foster in charge of his oversight work, Grassley has openly speculated about whether former FBI Director James Comey leaked classified information as Comey raised alarms about Donald Trump's possible interference in the Russian probe. Grassley and the other Republicans on the committee have questioned the impartiality of a former member of Mueller's team, cast doubt on the credibility of the FBI secret court application for permission to surveil a Trump campaign associate, and called for a second special counsel to investigate matters related to Hillary Clinton. A firm that conducted opposition research on Trump has made clear in court it believes Grassley's committee, with Foster as its lead investigator, had leaked sensitive information about its business. Most recently, many of those interviewed by ProPublica said Foster engineered Grassley's most unusual public announcement asking federal authorities to consider criminal charges against Christopher Steele, the ex-British spy who compiled the dossier warning of possible collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. Do you see what is going on here? They are masters of protocol. They are masters of process. And then when they have a conspiracy theory-minded obsession, they're going to fix the law around their obsessive beliefs and what the reality is. Or what's even more possible, they don't care. They know what the reality is. They just want the power and the money. For Foster's critics, and they include Republicans as well as Democrats, his provocative work on the Trump-Russia investigation is just the latest chapter in the career of a partisan combatant willing to discard norms and indulge in conspiratorial thinking as he pursues investigations favorable to Republicans. Hillary Clinton, with her foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, that made sure that poor kids were fed, medicine was available, young girls had an educational possibility and could actually get an education. That is anathema. Those are evil deeds, and they must be stopped. They believe, this fellow here, Foster, probably believes that it's just a ruse. That evil witch, Hillary Clinton, and her evil husband and anybody associated with them are just using the guise of egalitarianism to do all the things that these guys do on a daily basis. And they think they are doing God's work and they are so good. And if they're able to do the evil thing, everybody's doing the evil thing. And they are better than everybody else. How dare these other people do what I do? Foster, who cut his teeth on Capitol Hill, working on the staff of former Representative Dan Burton, repug of Indiana, who fueled the theory of foul play, and Vince Foster's suicide, called for required AIDS testing for all Americans, and drew the ire of many for his role in various Judiciary Committee investigations of the Obama administration. The way it seemed to go every time with Jason, conspiracy to the point it was ridiculous, said one Democratic aide who had dealt with Jason Foster. The aide was one of several interviewed by ProPublica, Democrat and Republican, who would not be identified because they're not authorized to speak publicly about the inner workings of Congress. And this guy wields a bit of power. And who wants to be on the end of that vendetta? Foster's career, including his work on the committee's Russia investigation, has caught the attention of the Trump administration. He's twice been approached, come on, work for us. And Foster says, I'd like to, but I'm doing pretty good right here. And the reason why is I'll jump to the chase here. This guy had a blog that he wrote under an assumed name because, you do that. And it was off the wall, racist, bigoted, homophobic, anti-Muslim. And he is now trying to disapprove of all that. Oh no, that was just, that's not me anymore. I've changed. I've grown. I'm better than that. And yet he only just dropped this is a blog that he ran from just around the time that Obama took office until just around the time that Trump took office. So he's changed tremendously. And he was behind all of these witch hunts against Hillary. The Fast and Furious scandal and such, that got blown out of proportion. So this guy's a piece of work, and so he needs to be exposed because nobody voted for this guy. And it's one thing to use the rule of law to go after the truth, and there's another to use the rule of law in the commission of a crime and an abuse of power. And with that, we are at the end of our broadcast period for the day, but Netroots Radio broadcasts on. There is, of course, breaking news throughout the day, and our various live shows will pick that up and get you current. But we'll visit with you tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio for the rest of the day. And we'll visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.